Here are my top tips on how to create your guest list to make it so much more seamless and easy. What's up, guys? My name is Jess and I am a wedding planner in Los Angeles, California, and I am here on YouTube to give you tips, tricks, and advice on all things wedding planning. So if you're newly engaged, welcome to the community. I hope that you can subscribe so you'll be notified each time I upload a new video. The first step is knowing your budget. So how many people are you willing to spend per person on this wedding? I think it's important to understand that as you're adding more guests into your wedding and who are attending, that means the more cutlery, the more glassware, the more chargers, the more plates, the more chairs, the more tables that need to be set up, and that is where a lot of it comes from, is the head count. So knowing exactly what your budget is on what you can afford, and that you guys already have the date and venue in place and understand what the food and beverage minimum is. So most times if you're having a venue that has a catering team involved, then most likely you have a food and beverage minimum. And what that is knowing how much money you have to spend at a certain point. So if there is a food and beverage minimum of like $5,000, then no matter what the guest count is, you have to be spending $5,000 for the wedding. And so allocating the cost of like, okay, well, if we have to spend food and drinks of $5,000 on our guests, then how many guests can we afford? And so to really understand how much does that meal cost per person, and knowing that you're okay with spending $80, $100 a meal on that person will really help you figure out your guest list. And all of it might be way easier said than done, but I think it's really important to talk about this because a lot of couples don't know that that's where a lot of the money comes from. So the more guests you have, the more money you're probably going to be spending on them, and you're going to have to, depending on your budget, like cut certain things out, right? So let's say if you have a smaller budget but you're having a higher guest count, then you're probably going to alter to having a buffet instead of plated meals, or you might have to have food that's done from like a taco truck to cut down the cost. But if you have a more higher budget and able to spend more money on your guests, then you can have the plated meals. If you have like a smaller guest count of, let's say, like 40, then you can spend more money on that significant higher cost meal and drinks. So it really depends on where you're at, because every single wedding is different and every single situation is different. So I'd like to point that out, is that it really depends on your budget and head count. Alright, and so when you figure that out and you understand where that cap is on how many people you can have at your wedding, let's say it's 100 people, then I think the fairest thing to do is split it in half. Most cases it can be 50% of the groom side and 50% of the bride side, or if it's groom and groom, bride and bride, I'm just gonna go with the couple. So let's say you and your spouse have agreed to do 50%, then great, but I think it's really a communication thing that you should talk about with your spouse. So sometimes, let's say the groom or the bride, one of the sides has a smaller family situation, and so not that many people will be invited compared to the other side. So sometimes you can do 60-40 or 70-30, but it all depends on you guys. So make sure you have that communication with your spouse to ask them, like, okay, if we can only have 100 people out or 150 people at this wedding, then we got to figure out who we're going to invite, and I'm going to get back into how we're going to exactly dumb this down. So to create your list, you want to talk about the top priority people there that you can't imagine having you guys walk down the aisle and say your vows and have your ceremony and be there part of the wedding. Like, absolutely need to have them a part of your wedding. You should be able to think about it in your head, because if they're that important, you're not going to forget about them. To be able to have that priority list of people where it's like, these are the people that's non-negotiable, they are going to be invited to this wedding, then great. The next thing that you need to do is you need to talk to your parents. If both of you guys have your parents and they are paying for this wedding, then they're probably going to want to have a say in who's invited, and they will probably have a better indication on who should be invited as like family members or, you know, people that you grew up with that they're family friends with. And sometimes at the weddings it could be really, is it a party for me or is it a party for my parents? But I think it depends on who's paying for the wedding. If it's both of you two that are paying for the wedding, then you guys should have the say on who's being invited. But if your parents are like paying for the wedding, then there should be a say on like certain family members and their friends or whoever who would be in attendance. But they should also be kind of in the back burner of attendance, because the people who you have already put as your priority list of your wedding should be in attendance, and if there's any left, then those are the people who you would also invite. So what I'm trying to say is talk to your parents and talk to your spouse about the people that should be there at the wedding. I would say that it needs to be people who have been a part of your love story, who have been there for you guys through thick and thin. That should be a part of your wedding. The next thing to account for is their plus ones. So not only is it going to be people who you've prioritized, but also think about, do they have a spouse or do they have a significant other that they've been with that person for a while that should be at the wedding, or that they're going to bring with them. And typically the rule should be if they've been dating that person for 6 months or longer, then they should be there. But if they're going through these people like water and they're always dating someone different, then they definitely don't deserve to have a +1, because you're gonna look back at these photos and you're gonna be like, that's that person at my wedding that you really didn't want to pay that much money for their plate or for them to be there, right? Because you have to remember, you're paying per plate, per person, per head count, per chair, per everything is for that person. So if you allocate the cost and how much you're paying per person, you could be paying $150 or $200 per person that's attending the wedding. And I think that's like a realization that a lot of couples don't really realize. So I think it's really important to know that. So anyways, before I digress, because I feel like I have, basically making sure that you are going to communicate that with your spouse and parents, so that way you understand like, okay, well, who needs to have a +1? And when you're thinking about +1s, you're also thinking about children. So are you going to have children at your wedding? People can fight me on this. People can say, I'm going to have children at my wedding. I want them to be a part of my wedding. Or people are gonna say no children at all. And people can argue about this back and forth, kids or no kids. It's the same thing like pets or no pets. And there's a lot of disagreements when it comes to like what and who is going to be a part of the wedding, but it's ultimately your wedding, and so you should be able to decide that. So if you decide that there's going to be kids at the wedding, and if they're going to be at a certain age, then you guys need to talk about that. So I feel like the whole conversation, or like there's a whole video, is about being able to communicate with your spouse about the guest list, but make sure that you talk about kids or no kids at the wedding, because if you're going to extend kids, that's still a certain head count. Also, within your catering team, is there a different price range for kids menus? Because sometimes they can be less, or like they would have a certain kids menu instead of like an adult menu, so that could also help you lower down the cost a little bit. Another thing would be, were you recently invited to a wedding and feel the need to invite them to your own wedding? That is also a communication tool that you should definitely talk to your spouse about. Are you guys really, really close? Do you guys have mutual friends? Because if you guys are close and you guys have mutual friends, then you should definitely invite them to your wedding. But if it was pretty random, then that's a different situation. And last but not least is setting a hard deadline. So make sure that when you have your guest list already ready, that you guys have a certain deadline to your guest where they need to respond back to you saying that they're coming or they're not coming. That way you can be able to alter the guest count. So if you're anticipating on more people coming than what was originally quoted from the vendors, or if it's going lower, then either you can alter that with like either adding in more people if you have to because of the food and beverage minimum, Or if you absolutely don't have one, then that's amazing, and you can stick to, like, you know, if you have a lower guest count than you thought you would, then you don't have to worry about like that payments and all of that stuff, and it makes everything so much more stress-free. But a lot of my couples are in food and beverage minimums because a lot of couples choose venues that are all-inclusive that include the catering company. And along with setting a deadline, you want to make sure you're giving you enough time to be able to manage that and go through the people who are coming and not coming. So if the catering team says like, hey, we need 2 weeks in advance to know the final head count, then I would say, you know, extend it a week earlier or even a month earlier. But I think it really depends on your work schedule, because most likely you're doing something other than planning your own wedding, or if you have a wedding planner, and if it comes with RSVP management, then great. But most brides handle it themselves, or most couples handle it themselves. And if you have like a wedding website like Zola or The Knot or something like that, that can be able to handle the like, if you have a wedding website and it can handle the online RSVP, then that's also great, and that will save you a ton of time. But you want to make sure that you're giving yourself enough time to be able to allocate, like, okay, how many people are coming and how many people aren't coming, and that would really, really help save a lot of time. And understanding your final head count, give it to your vendors, and then, you know, working with your wedding planner, or, you know, working with the other vendors in general, that you'll understand where the guest count is and how much money you're actually spending on it. And I feel like a lot of people kind of just like throw in like, we're gonna have 200 people, 150 people, but they don't really understand how much money they're gonna be spending at the end of the day. Yeah, I'm running out of breath with that one. I totally did like a long run sentence. All right, guys, so I hope you're sticking with me. You've taken some notes, and that really helped you to be able to make your guest list and talk to your spouse, because communication is very much key in any relationship. My name is Jessica, and I enjoyed this video, and I hope you did too, and that you can give it a big thumbs up if you liked it as well. Comment, heart, all of the things, and I will see you guys at the next video. Bye!